Hey there, Twins fans, and welcome to Twins in the 2000s, a journey through the contemporary history of the Minnesota Twins. I am your host, Nick Nelson of TwinsDaily.com, joined by fellow Twins Daily founder and noted Twins geek, John Bonus. John, how are you doing there tonight?
Hi, kids. I'm good.
So we're excited to get started on the series, just to give people a little bit of background and context as to what we're doing here. Back in the 2020, while things were shut down due to the whole COVID-19 situation, we were kind of looking for interesting things to talk about with nothing going on baseball-wise. So we conceived this series called Twins in the 2000s, a 20-part series that runs through every Twins season, sort of looking back at every season since the turn of the century. And each season, it had kind of the structure. We would do an overview of what happened that season. We would look at sort of the MVP players, the top players on that team, the pivotal moments in games, and some of the most memorable highlights of the season. A bunch of different writers contributed. It was quite a lot of fun. And I think what we sort of learned was that going through those stories, it raised a lot of opportunities for conversations and debates and nostalgic reminiscing. So here with yet another shutdown, this one a little less forced by outside circumstances and more the result of some contentious labor disputes. We figured it would be an opportunity to dive back into that series in the form of a video and podcast series where we'll kind of take each season and dive in and look back and sort of run through and debate some of the memorable moments. So it's not like a history show, really. We're not looking back at, the 1960s, the Killebrew, Carew, Oliva days. It's more of a sort of, like I said, contemporary history. Seasons that a lot of people watching and listening to this probably remember, at least vaguely. But
look at you denying that you're old. Look at you denying that you're old.
I'm old. I'm kind of old.
Anything that we can remember can't be history. That's where you're coming from. That's
exactly.
30s. That's such a guy in his 30s take right there. I gotta tell you. If I'm talking about, let's see, year 2000 was, how old were you?
I was 15.
15. Yes. So I was 15 in 1982. Would you consider 1982 history?
That's that's a little more ancient history, some would say, but no, we thought that would be kind of one of the fun things about going through this. Me and John were both, we remember these seasons in different ways. We were different ages, different stages of our lives. So I think we'll both have some different sort of perspectives as we look back on these seasons, which maybe have some influence and implications on the current day Twins, which we can sort of unpack as we look back at the evolution of the franchise here in the past couple decades. John, anything else you want to add here before we get started? I see you have a beer, so I'm going to grab one myself.
Yeah, I've got a Red Cloak by Finnegan's. I think the year 2000 will be is the last year that the Twins really stunk. Coming out of the 90s, where they had that nice run in the late 80s, and things looked real good going into 91, and then suddenly the bottom just sort of dropped out, and it dropped out for 9 or 10 years. Things were pretty hopeless for a while. I remember specifically in the late 90s, the Twins had a season ticket deal, which was $99 for the whole season. You got 81 games for $99, upper deck outfield, and on top of that, they threw in a bat signed by Kirby Puckett. Hand signed by Kirby Puckett. That was $100.
Really trying to get people out to the dome.
1997, 1998, as I recall. 1999, we were taking our kids to 2000. We were taking our young children to the Metrodome just to run around in the winter, because they wanted to climb up and down the stairs and go visit the scoreboard and stuff like that. We would take them there for, because it was a cheap date night for the kids. That was it. So. Yeah, this was the last of the years where things really looked bad.
Yeah, I totally remember, the 90s. The 90s at the Metrodome, it was, probably partially because I was young. I was coming into my adolescence. I was a kid, and also the team wasn't very good. But my memories were just parading around the stadium, not really paying too much attention to the baseball. But it was great times down at the Dome those days. And like you said, it was really cheap to get in. I remember the knothole tickets we would jump on. So with each episode, we're going to kick it off by basically kind of setting it up, taking a look back, recapping the previous season and off season to sort of set the stage for, what was the narrative entering this season for the Twins. For this first episode, we'll zoom out a little bit and take a look at sort of the big picture of the 90s, which John was kind of touching on there. So, of course, we know the Twins won a World Series in 1987. 4 years later, they won another World Series in 1991 with kind of the same core, Tom Kelly, Andy MacPhail, sort of leading that charge as manager and general manager. They followed the 91 World Series win by winning 90 games in 1992, just missed the playoffs. And from there, it pretty much all fell off. They finished in 5th place the following year. Then in 1994, you had the strike fall that took chunks out of 2 seasons and brought with it the creation of new divisions. So the Twins found themselves in this newly created Central Division, which they would sit in the cellar of for quite a while. They finished in 4th or 5th place every year for the rest of the decade. Right around the time of the strike, Andy MacPhail, who was the GM that orchestrated those World Series championships, left to go to the Chicago Cubs. And a new strapping young buck named Terry Ryan took over the front office to embark on a little bit of a rebuild there in the 90s. So as John mentioned, a lot of 4th and 5th place finishes there in the late 90s, a lot of sub 500 seasons. But in this 2000 season that we're going to look at here is where things really started to kind of come together and set up a run that a really fun run that we're going to follow here through some of these early episodes of the series. So in 1999, the year before the 2000 season, they went 68 and 94. On paper, it didn't look like they improved very much in 2000. They finished 69 and 93, so they only won one more game. But here, the signs of progress were really starting to become evident. Brad Radke turned in his 5th straight 200-yard season. Corey Koskie started settling in as the full-time third baseman. Matt Lawton made his first All-Star team as the right fielder. We had a couple players starting to establish themselves in the outfield around him by the name of Jack Jones and Torrey Hunter. And meanwhile, a couple of the prospects that were received back in the Chuck Knobloch trade of 1996, certainly a signature move for Terry Ryan, they started to really establish themselves, especially Christian Guzman, the shortstop, took a big step forward, led the league with 20 triples in the year 2000. Eric Milton really started to continue to cement himself as the number 2 behind Radke in the rotation. He threw 200 innings with an above-average ERA. A.J. Przinsky took over as the catcher in the second half that year. Tom Kelly, always a little averse to younger players and rookies, but A.J. was finally able to find his way into his esteem with his bat really cementing him as that catcher. And then the most notable development, I would say, of this 2000 season, not a player who performed very well, but a pitcher by the name of Johan Santana, who had been acquired via the Rule 5 draft the previous offseason. Of course, since you're taking in the Rule 5 draft, you have to stay on the roster all year long, which he did, and it was really ugly, a 6.49 ERA in 86 innings, but certainly a nice little harbinger of things to come there. So as we look at this 69 and 93 Twins team, I think like you were saying, John, they weren't there yet, but you really started to see the pieces coming together.
Yeah, if you talk to Terry Ryan late in his tenure, and you talk to him about the breakthrough that they ended up having the following year, 2001, 2002, he was of the opinion, I think, in the mid-'90s that they had a bunch of prospects that were ready. They sort of gathered enough talent to actually move forward. And then it didn't happen. They had David McCarthy. They had Paul Sorrento. They had, just a lot of guys that just never really hit, never really landed, right? And so they scrapped that and went the other direction. And in fact, in 1990, the year before, between 98 and 99, I think, is when they really cut the payroll. The payroll was cut down tremendous amount. Before that, the Twins were, a little on the lower end of the below average payroll, but they were, 23rd, 22nd in the league, something like that. I think it was 98 that from 98 to 99 that they just slashed it. They were down to a $16 million payroll in 1999, and that wasn't because they traded away Knobloch and his salary, because first of all, Knobloch wasn't making that much with the Twins. That's one of the reasons they traded him away. And second of all, it happened the year before. They literally just cut all of the veterans. In 1999, they just gave all that time to essentially players making league minimum salaries, right? So, there was a full rebuild on in 1999. That was the full teardown, and that, like you said, that included prospects that they had received in the trade for Knobloch, which was Milton and Guzman. We started to see, like you said, in Guzman in 2000 a real chance of what he could be. And the truth is, I think by the end of the year 2000, our expectations for Guzman were probably never at their were at their highest and maybe never had been higher. Maybe by the mid of 2001 they'd been higher, but that was about it. After that, he kind of failed to disappoint ever since that weird thing that whatever happened in the All-Star game break in 2001, 2002, I think. So this was 1 year from completely bottoming out. I mean, there's a reason they were giving away those tickets as much as they were. It's because, they had a payroll of like $16 million. And it not only was that lowest in the American League or lowest in Major League Baseball, it was lowest by a lot. It was lowest by like $5, $6, $7 million, 40% lower than the other teams had.
Yeah, you're taking away my fun fact, but I might as well just jump right ahead to it because the Twins' total payroll this season, I want to say it was $15 million, $16 million actually, which is $1 million more than Byron Buxton is going to make as a base salary for the entirety of his contract, which is a great bargain. Their highest paid player was Brad Radke at $3.5 million. So really puts into perspective how much the spending structure has changed generally in the last 20 years and how much the Twins have changed. I mean, you want to complain about the cheap poll ads and low payrolls. At least they don't have a $16 million payroll, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, they were 30th in the league in 2000. They were 30th in the league in 2001. Most of the publicity around the team off the field had to do more with them whining about not getting a stadium, and ultimately, it might have been around this time that they thought that they had a deal completed with, or threatened us with a deal with to moving to North Carolina and the Delta, the Tri-Delta, I think area, something like that. So the triangle area of North Carolina. So that there was a lot of negativity around the Twins and their pay. As much as negativity as there is now, that was well borne out, and had it was even worse 20 years ago, and it was well earned 20 years ago.
Yeah, definitely one of the big narratives, going above and beyond everything happening on the field at the Metrodome was the clamoring for a new stadium from ownership and these rising contraction talks, which became a huge theme. And we'll dive into that a little more in the next episode because that's really when that started to come to a head. Just to round out a few details about this 2000 team, as you can see, 748 runs scored, 880 allowed. Pretty brutal pitching staff after you get past Brad Radke and Eric Milton. Joe Mays at age 24 was starting to break in. He posted a 5.56 ERA. Sean Bergman, if you remember that name, posted a 9.66 ERA in 15 appearances. JC Romero, before converting to the bullpen, posted a 7.02 ERA in 11 starts. But a couple guys in the bullpen, LaTroy Hawkins stepping in as closer, Eddie Guardado emerging as a reliever. So, again, a couple pieces even on that pitching staff really starting to show themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we got to see JC, like you said, JC Romero kind of step into there. LaTroy Hawkins, by the way, was a closer for part of that season. He was not good. And we saw that again a year later, when they tried to do some juggling around some things. So, yeah, all in all, it was still a down season. There were some, like you said, some signs that maybe things would turn around, but I don't think people necessarily expected it to turn around after the season. It was just a tough year.
So, with that high-level overview out of the way, let's take a look at some individual performances. With each episode, we like to talk about who were the top performers on each of these teams and who was the MVP. Sometimes we might agree, sometimes we might disagree. So I've pulled here 3 of the top performers with their stats. My choice for team MVP for this year is Brad Radke. He threw 226 2/3 innings, had a 4.45 ERA, which I realize by today's standards does not sound very good, but Brad Radke, is such an interesting player to talk about with people who maybe didn't watch the game back then, or even some who did and just don't really remember what it was like. I mean, this is the year 2000. This is 2 years after Bonds and McGwire and Sosa with the home run race. I mean, this is still pretty much at the height of steroid ball. So a 4.45 ERA back then was actually quite good. That was a ERA plus of 116, which means it was 16% better than average. And you're doing that over 227 innings. One thing I don't know if people remember about Brad Radke is the guy was a horse. This was,
right.
Like I said, his 5th straight year throwing 200-plus innings. He would very often throw, 240. Never really missed a start. Very reliable. Led the team in both in wins above replacement, according to both Fangraphs and Baseball Reference. So This wasn't the best season of Brad Radke's career by any means. That was pretty clearly 3 years earlier when he won 20 games in 97. But a customarily very good year for a guy who was the number one on, granted, not a very great team, but a very solid number one pitcher really for them at that time. A couple other performances. Oh, you want to?
No, go ahead, because I want to come back to Radke after you cover the other ones.
For sure, yeah. Just a couple other performances to call out here. Matt Lawton, as I mentioned, was the team's lone all-star in this season. Hit 305. He was an on-base guy, drew a lot of walks, had a 405 on-base percentage as the right fielder there. Not a ton of power, but, 44 doubles, 13 homers, 88 RBIs, clearly the beating heart of this offense. And then another guy worth mentioning who's going to appear a lot in these sort of MVP discussions, a hugely underrated player in Twins history, in my mind, Corey Koskie. This was really his kind of breakthrough year where he truly took over at third base, batted 300 with a 400 on base percentage, 9 homers, 32 doubles, 65 RBIs. So 3 of the standout names on this team, I would say. John, which player performances really kind of strike you from the 2000 season?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you included Koskie, but I think we're going to get a lot of chances to talk about him in further episodes that we do here. As this was basically kind of the start of his career, really, with the Twins. His first break, it was kind of his breakout season. Matt Lawton. Truth is, we're not going to get a lot more chances to talk about Lawton. Lawton is you were talking about underrated players with Koskie. I got to tell you, Matt Lawton, at the time was, I think, in his 6th year with the Minnesota Twins. I don't know if he had that much in total full service time, but he was approaching the point where he might be a free agent. He had really been, other than Knobloch, but Knobloch was gone by 97. He had been sort of the Twins' most consistent performer in and out for the last. This is a 3-year run that he was the most consistent performer, and ended up being valuable enough that in 2001 they'd end up trading him away when they were trying to kind of scramble and make the playoffs. The end of the I think it was that was the end of the Soul Patrol there. But I really want to talk about Radke. Radke's the one that is, I think, the most gets the MVP, and you pointed out his stats, which I agree with you. He was by far the most valuable player on that team. He's the most valuable player on most of the teams of the 90s, mm-hmm. I think, or one of the top 2. But the other thing that happened then was he signed a contract, long-term deal with the Twins in the middle of that 2000 season. He was I had to look it up. He was about to be a free agent after this 2000 season. This was going to be his last year as a Minnesota Twin. And I took a look at it. I'm like, was he really going to be a free agent or what? And I took a look and I said, well, his debut was April 29th, 1995, which today we would see that and we would think, oh, well, they held him back for service time, right? But in 1995, why was his debut not until April 29th?
I believe that season started late due to the strike.
That's right. Because of the collective bargaining agreement had been renegotiated when the players went on strike in August of 1994. And as a result, Radke got a full year of service time for that. So he was approaching 6 full years of service time, and the expectation was that he was going to walk from much greener fields. Instead, they ended up handing him a 4-year deal for, I think, $32 million, $8 million a year, which, while, did not make him the most expensive pitcher in Major League Baseball or anything like that, was a fair deal to give to somebody. It was about what you would expect to get in free agency. And in fact, when's the last time you ever heard of a free agent signing a pending free agent about to approach free agency for his first time on his walk year, sign a deal midway through the walk year? That just doesn't happen. Part of the rumors around that was that, Twins management was sort of, like I said, they were trying to build a stadium, right? And they had a lot of changes in the executive ranks around then. I think in a little bit later, we'll talk about one of the other weird events that happened as a result of that. But I think one of the results of that is that, they handed him more money than they normally would have handed him. Had the same executive team probably been in place, that was sort of in charge from the mid 90s to the mid teens, I don't think he might have gotten that deal, but there were some other voices in the room, it sounds like, that ended up, lobbying, offering him and him accepting that deal. But the result was a good one, which was everybody suddenly thought, oh, they're serious. Because after that pay cut that we saw in 1998, there was a lot of thought process that the Twins just weren't even really going to play Major League Baseball anymore. That it just didn't matter, right? For them to pony up and pay a solid number one starter what he was worth sent a signal, to the fans and to the team and to the players and to the coaching staff and so on and to the organization. No. We think we've got something here, and he's going to be one of the cornerstones of the next winning team. And fortunately, that winning team we'd start to see signs of that next winning team the very next year. And the 2002 breakthrough season was the start of several division championships.
Great point. And you look at Radke, a guy who was drafted in the 8th round by the Twins out of high school in 1991 in that last World Series season, developed into a 20-game winner, an all-star, a Cy Young contender at times, and who they, like you mentioned, took the step to lock down. They didn't play the classic role of the Minnesota Twins being the farm system for the rest of the league and sending him to the Yankees. And of course, the Twins, how many success stories of a drafted and developed pitcher who stayed home have the Twins had since then? Right. Zero. They didn't keep Johan Santana, who granted was not drafted and developed. And most recently, they did not keep Jose Barrios, who is maybe one of the closest things. So, people complain about this, and rightfully so. And you look at the struggles, or at least the inability to get over the hump for the Twins in the last 20 years. That's certainly a glaring thing that sticks out.
Yeah, for that reason alone, Brad Radke is sort of the MVP, and I think it also ties into something we talked about, a little bit earlier in the episode, which is it was really an indication that, they were seeing. You didn't see the full forest yet, but you saw sort of the saplings. You saw sort of the trees starting to take root. So, and they weren't gonna let the big one get away, which was a good start. Which, you could also say the same thing, I suppose, about this year's Twins too. That they've developed somebody, they're going to pay him, and we're going to see, hopefully, even despite the fact that there's a lot of question marks about a lot of areas of this team, they feel like they've locked in a cornerstone that they can hang on to now and keep them competitive for the next, half dozen years.
Absolutely. So I think with this one, not a lot of debate. We're both in agreement. Fine performances from Lawton, Koski, Jacque Jones, Guzman, a few other players on the offense, but really Brad Radke, the leader of this rotation, really coming into his own as a veteran, pretty clearly the MVP of this 2000 Twins team. So with each episode, we're going to take sort of a high-level view of the season, as we've done, zero in on some player performances, try to pick an MVP, and then we're just going to run through a few of the most memorable moments, good or bad, from these seasons, and try to pick out. We'll both make our pick for what we feel was the most memorable, the most significant moment of the season. So for the 2000 season, I've picked a few different ones that really stand out in the minds of Twins fans. I put this one in there just because of what it's representative of. On the first game of the season, the first opposing batter was Gerald Williams of the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, as they were known then. Brad Radke gave up a leadoff home run to the first batter he faced. Why is that significant? Because as good as Radke was, those who watched him will certainly remember that his biggest weakness was that first inning. It was like he just had to kind of find his groove, get his grip for the changeup. I don't know what it was, but this was something that he himself acknowledged and was frustrated by and struggled with. He just really had a hard time getting going. Is this a memory that sticks in your mind, John?
I don't remember that actual home run, but I mean, yeah, Brad Radke giving up a home run on the first pitch of opening day is peak Brad Radke. Like that is, I mean, he not only did he struggle in the first innings, he struggled with home runs, and especially early on in the innings, and he was always the opening day starter. I don't know how many years in a row he was the opening day starter, something like 7 years in a row or something like that. In fact, I think he might have the longest streak of opening day starts of any Minnesota Twins pitcher. I have to take a look at that, right? And by the way, I think Barrios was the one who challenged him on that most recently. He had a pretty good streak going himself. That's peak Brad Radke, no question about it.
The classic Radke start would be to give up a home run to the first batter and then cruise through the eighth.
Sure.
Just a gem, right?
That's right. Which did not happen because they lost 7-0. So
on April 15th, Cal Ripken Jr. notched his 3,000th hit at the Metrodome off of Hector Carrasco. The Metrodome saw within that span quite a few 3,000th hits. I believe Dave Winfield got his at the Metrodome.
I was there for Dave Winfield. I was not there for Ripken.
Yeah,
I mean, Molitor had one in Kansas City, but as a Twin,
he was on the Twins, right? Yep. Yeah, so that was not a Twins moment, but there weren't a lot of great Twins moments in this season. They did win 69 games, and then in August they first established the team's Hall of Fame, which was kind of, I guess, surprising. They didn't have one until the year 2000, but the inaugural class for the Twins Hall of Fame: Harmon Killebrew, Rod Carew, Tony Oliva, Kent Herbeck, Kirby Puckett, and Calvin Griffith. So maybe they'd renege that last one if they had the chance, but a lot of huge names, and then of course many of those faces went up on the big curtain out in upper right field in the Metrodome. So
we should say they were definitely retiring numbers before that. They just hadn't established a Hall of Fame for sort of that next tier of player.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep. So that goes to this day. I mean, lots of players still being added now. I believe Morneau was just added last year to the Twins Hall of Fame.
That's right.
He's
exactly
the most recent addition. So
that's absolutely right. Let me. I'll throw out a couple more moments. The first is Radke signing that contract extension. We've already talked about that. That happened, I think, on July 3rd. Or at least it was announced on July 2nd or July 3rd, right around then. And, sort of giving everybody the thought that maybe the Twins were going to actually be a Major League Baseball team. It was at least a step in the right direction. I've got to call out one other goofy one that I'd kind of forgotten happened until I started researching it. There was talk in the shortly after Radke signed that, and because they were so desperately trying to identify to build an outdoor stadium, the Minnesota Twins floated the idea of Major League Baseball of creating a temporary stadium outdoors just for one weekend in Bloomington. The idea was that they were going to put up stands for 25,000 people for one weekend series versus the Texas Rangers on August 18th to the 20th, like just one series. And ultimately it fell through because the Metropolitan Stadium Commission had concerns that doing so would break the lease, sort of, not for the Twins, but for the Vikings, that it would establish a precedent such that the Vikings could break the lease of their, if they let the Twins play outside the Metrodome, they would have to let the Vikings play outside the Metrodome. And they wanted the Vikings locked into that lease. So they went to the Vikings and asked whether or not they would negotiate that, and the Vikings said no, and as a result the whole thing died. Now there might have been other problems too. It had not been approved by Major League Baseball, had not been approved by the Texas Rangers. All that stuff had to happen, right? But for like a glorious week and a half or so, 10-day reporting period, there was the opportunity that they were going to try and throw together a ballpark with 25, very similar sort of Field of Dreams, right? A ballpark of 25,000 bleachers and play outdoor baseball for one weekend in August. Who was the guy Chris Klauser, I think, was the executive who had sort of been, he'd been made a vice president. He was a friend of the Pohlads. He was also the one that I was referring to before as the person that, might have been one of the reasons Brad Radke ended up getting a $32 million 4-year offer from the Twins. It was his brainchild that they were going to try and do this. The Twins were lined up and trying to do it, and it didn't work. So I don't know. Of all the goofy things they tried to do to get a stadium, and we're about to get to some much as we go the following year, we're going to get to a much less fun way of trying to get a stadium. This was one of the more inventive, I guess, ways, even if it was ultimately fruitless.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't remember that at all. So speaking of outdoor baseball in Bloomington, did you ever go to Twins games at the Met, or was that?
Oh,
Was
absolutely.
that before your time? Yeah,
no, absolutely.
What are your memories of the Met? That was definitely before my time.
Wooden benches. I mostly remember wooden benches. I think my very first baseball game might have been one where it was Harmon Killebrew Day at Metropolitan Stadium, but this was after he was playing for the Royals. They threw a Harmon Killebrew Day towards the end of that year, as it was, I think, becoming clear that he was going to have to leave the game. So that's one memory. But yeah, mostly I remember running around there, and I remember the seats down the left field line past the foul, or not, as you kind of approach the foul pole and in the outfield and stuff, were wooden, with paint well worn on the wood. It wasn't like a nice shiny gloss, beautiful paint. It was just beat up stuff where you and your friends would go, and it was great because it was the 70s and nobody gave a damn, and you could just run around as a kid and act like a savage as a 10-year-old, and nobody cared. So
love it. That reminds me of myself at the good old Midway St. Paul Saints Stadium. I ran around like a crazy person in that place. Right. Yeah. On the bleachers.
Parents just give up in that environment. They just throw up their hands. They're like, whatever. How bad can it be?
So what's your pick for the most memorable or significant moment of the 2000 Twins season?
I'm going to stick with the Brad Radke theme. That him signing that deal was a significant shock to sort of the narrative that had been around the Twins for the last, really since the 1992 season. And it was really the only significant signing they made of any player until maybe extending Hunter another 4 or 5 years from then. So it was a big deal.
Yeah, I think I got to go with you on this. I didn't have it listed because I'd kind of forgotten about that. But when you look at sort of the significance of, look, a $32 million contract as we have listed here, that's double their 2000 payroll that they committed to Brad Radke. His salary obviously going from 3.5 to 8 million a year skyrocketed. I know these seem small totals by today's standards, but they weren't that small back then. And for this Twins team, which, as you mentioned, a lot of people are wondering, like, do they care? Are they just going to shrivel up and go away here with this like paltry, payroll and, not showing a lot of interest? They've been losing for nearly a decade since the World Series win. What's this team going to do? I think that was a pretty significant statement that they weren't there to play. They weren't going to give up. And so I'm with you. I think that's a good pick. I
just looked it up. It was a 4-year, $36 million contract. So yeah, that was big. And It also had a full no trade clause, which is another thing that, as we've seen recently, players tend to care about, that they're going to stick around. They want to know that they're really going to stick around. And that was also a new thing for the Twins.
All right. So one trivia question here, John, before we sign off for this first episode. In June of 2000, the Twins, by virtue of their 68-win season the previous year, had the number 2 overall picked in the MLB draft. Do you remember who they took with that second overall selection in 2000?
Was that Johnson?
It was.
Adam Johnson.
Adam Johnson.
Yeah. That was his famous quote. Oh.
Yes, Adam Johnson, a college pitcher who looked out of Cal State, who had all the makings of a super dominant, fast rising. It just goes to show you what a crapshoot. He made it to the big leagues a couple years later, but he was never any good at all, and he was done after 2003 as a major leaguer. So, luckily they would. This 69-win season here in 2000 was actually the worst in the major leagues, which ended up gifting them with the number 1 overall pick for 2001, which I'm sure people know what happened with that, and which I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit in the next season when we talk about the 2001 season.
Yeah, Johnson ended up having a real short career with the Twins. He came in very cocky and didn't have quite the year he expected, or quite the career he expected. So,
yep. Cat's eating some food off the plate there, which means I guess it's time for us to log off. So thank you for joining us for this look back at the 2000 season. We're going to keep it going. Make sure you check back, whether you're on YouTube or the podcast. If you subscribe, you'll get each episode. The next episode, we'll be taking a look at the 2001 season, in which some of these pieces that were starting to come together really start to coalesce, and all of a sudden the Twins turn into a competitive team. And it's pretty fun, at least for the first half. But I'm really looking forward to look back at it, because the Twins had several All-Stars on that team, a lot of really exciting moments, and we'll have a lot more fun things to talk about that are actually Twins related and not opponents getting 3,000 hit at the Metrodome and stuff.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Make sure you tune into the next one. Thanks for joining us for Twins in the 2000s.